It is time for Southeastern Rewind's Tell Me More. Hey, y'all, I'm David Sommers with the Tennessee stud Ron Fuller, answering 5 questions from the latest Studcast, now on Ron's new home on YouTube. The 5 questions on this edition of Tell Me More come from Studcast episode number 10. It's called Tony's Call, a reference to the original Studcast co-host, Knoxville's Tony Basilio. Remember to find Southeastern Rewind on YouTube, subscribe, ring the bell to get reminders on when the greatest stories in wrestling will be dropped on YouTube. And be sure to tell your friends about Southeastern Rewind. All right, stud, you are knocking it out of Chilhowie Park on the new Southeastern Rewind channel on YouTube. Congratulations, dude. This thing is growing really quickly.
Yeah, it is, man, Dave. I'm really proud, Dave. I expected it was going to take quite a while to get 1,000 subscribers, which is kind of it's a big number for YouTube. Lots of things happen when you reach that 1,000 subscriber level, and
yeah,
we're just right on the cusp of it right now. And we've only been at this for a couple of months, and so I got to thank everybody out there, those that have gone and subscribed. And obviously, if you happen to be listening to this and you haven't subscribed, then please do. And we're about to start to put some things on it, Dave, that we've been waiting on, man. Videos are going to start to arrive. In fact, we did that Terry Funk and Dory Funk Jr. Interview, and we have it on video now.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
So fans may want to go back. If you've seen it once, you may want to go back and just see what the Funks looked like 27 years ago.
So you got it loaded now?
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
look. There. It's on the YouTube channel right now.
Gotcha. All right, see, I check in almost every day. Just, is there anything new? So I haven't been in the last couple of days. So I'll certainly do that as well. And I know Studcast fans will do that too. And listen, for Studcast fans that really haven't checked it out, it is a perfect place for Southeastern fans, stud fans to get together. So it's a cool deal. And listen, once you start loading up with these videos, you better stand back because it is going to take off. No doubt about it.
I think it will. I think, fans are going to really enjoy the way we're going to do these TV shows once we start putting them on. And I think within the next, we're going to have one, believe, from 1978, probably by next week. Just an entire Southeastern show, which is really, really difficult to find.
Yeah.
So we'll have that on next week. And then probably the week after that, we're looking at the first USA television program with Gordon Soley and I as commentators. We'll go up 2 weeks from now. So,
all right, yeah,
we're going to start. We're going to start really putting some good stuff on there, and I just hope everyone will just be patient with us, because eventually they're going to be able to find 400 or 500 wrestling TV shows on that site.
Hey, that's when it's really going to blow up. And the cool thing that you've been talking about is it's not just random shows. Once you get these USA shows going, they'll tell the storyline just as it was delivered, however many years ago that show is from.
Yeah, 1988.
Yeah.
So that's way, way back, but 33 years, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
So, and yes, and I think that's going to be the real hookup for our fans. Fans have never anywhere on YouTube been able to see these wrestling shows, Southeastern, Continental, or USA, in sequence.
Yeah.
And I believe when they start seeing them in sequence, they'll realize just why those shows were so popular.
Yeah, and follow the storyline as it was written from that day. So that is really cool. All right, Stud, 5 questions on original Studcast episode number 10. You ready?
I'm ready.
Hey, let's do it. Elwood Sandridge says, any good stories about fishing with Eddie Graham?
Well, Elwood, and I'm familiar with that name. Elwood's a great fan. I've seen him. I'm sure he's had questions before on learning trees and a lot of others. And this is a really good one, obviously. I don't really have a fishing story that smacks me from Eddie right off the bat, but I have a lobstering story that is pretty unreal. And And I think that's what all this focus on here. And I was probably about 17 years old, and we were living in Atlanta, and Dad and Eddie were really good friends. Mike Graham was just about the same age we were, about a couple of years younger than me, about real close to the same age as Rob. And we got on planes with Roy Lee Welch and Jackie Welch, Lester's sons, and Eddie had Mike. We had two different airplanes, private planes, Eddie's plane and Lester's plane. We flew from Tampa to a little island in the Bahamas called Green Turtle. And then we stayed there for 2 days and one night, and we went lobstering to get lobsters and to dive, and then we brought them back, and we had them cooked by the people on the island. Then wow, those lobsters were just unbelievable. But the crazy part about this story is Green Turtle was such a small island, you couldn't land on it. So you landed on an island that was next to it. You could see Green Turtle from the island we landed on, but there was nothing on that island that we landed on at all. It's just a runway.
Okay.
So they had to come over in boats and pick us up and take us back over to Green Turtle. And then the next day they took us out, probably 3 boats, maybe 4 boats, 3 people in each of those boats or whatever. And Eddie and Mike were tremendous divers. That Mike had been diving all his life, and Eddie was too. And they actually didn't need tanks to get to the bottom. This was probably 25-foot water, which that's a pretty good free dive, actually, if you're going to be down there long enough to spear a lobster.
Yeah.
So, it's a pretty good challenge. So for the rest of us, we used tanks because we weren't familiar with diving that well. We couldn't snorkel and get down there. And so we all were out there at a really rough day, horribly rough. But, when you go someplace like that on vacation, you can't say, well, I'm going to wait for a pretty day, because you only got 2 days.
Right.
So the guys that are running the boats, they were saying, hey, right, mate, you think you're going to be all right with this, And we were like, well, I hope so, right? So we end up out there on this reef, probably, I'd say, 5 miles off the island, 25 foot of water maybe. And wow, beautiful spot. Lobsters just everywhere. Crazy amount of lobsters. And so I was having a hard time getting down. It was really one of my first dives ever, and Rob was having even more trouble than I did.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you got back in the boats were rocking pretty good, and it wasn't long before quite a few of us were ready to go back. Ready to take an early powder, man. I mean, that seasickness is really a nasty thing, man.
Yeah.
So I remember that my dad, and he happened to be one of them, wasn't feeling good himself. And he says at one point, he says, okay, anybody that's seasick and wants to go back, come over here to this boat. And I remember everybody jumped out of their boats and they were about to capsize.
He didn't have to say it twice, did he?
Oh gosh, man! I'm telling you, they were scrambling and crawling over that thing like they were ants, man, in an ant bed.
Wow!
And I was like, so then it got down to where I was one of the last ones to try to get on board, and Dad says, "Hey, we're sinking this boat." He goes, "Ron, you're off." He dumped me, and I can't believe somebody else he dumped off. I can't remember who it was.
Yeah.
So anyway, I get back in the other boats, and and I'm seasick and having a hard time doing any diving. But I hang out there for probably another hour while Eddie and the guys that weren't hurt. And if you were really strange thing about getting seasick, if you're in the water and snorkeling, you're not going to get seasick.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's because you're not rocking like you are in that boat.
Right. Yeah.
So, so Eddie was tanking them up. He was bringing these lobsters up, and Mike was still there. He was bringing up lobsters, and a couple of the Bahamian guys were, they were getting them too. So anyway, we went back and we spent the night in this house, and they took all the lobsters. Uh, they had the lobsters were beautiful, big, huge
Mm-hmm.
lobsters.
Mm-hmm.
But there was one lobster, Dave. It was the biggest to this day. I have never seen anything like it. Its tail was probably close to 3 feet long, just
Whoa.
the tail,
Wow.
and a foot wide, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, he stood up. He stood up when you put him on his feet. He stood up probably 2 feet high.
Holy cow. Did they have a pot big enough to drop the thing into?
Oh, he was a monster. He was just a total monster. So what we did is we took all of the lobster back, and we ate every lobster except for that boy.
Hmm.
And then the next night we stayed there. You know, we ate again before we left, and all of us, the 13, 14, whatever the number was, we all ate that one lobster and couldn't eat it all.
Wow. That's
So,
incredible.
it was, but what a great time. Eddie was really nice to do that type of thing. Lester had his plane. Eddie had his own plane. It was a vacation and an experience I'll never forget. And it was right at Christmas time, couple of nights before Christmas. Can't remember the exact year, but all of the islanders in the tradition went around, and the entire island were real. All the houses were close together and just
Mhm.
small little roads. There wasn't a car on the island.
Yeah.
Everybody walked, and
Wow.
they all paraded through there, and they sang Christmas carols all night, till 4 or 5 in the morning,
Wow.
just walking from house to house. Uh, it's a great experience, and so Eldridge, it's kind of a fishing experience, but either way, it was a truly wonderful experience for a 17-year-old kid that my first trip to the Bahamas. I'm going to go there quite a bit after that, Eldridge, but I'm going to go over there to rasslin. It's a whole new ball game, man. when you go there to wrestle.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like, son, I love you, but get out of the boat.
Yeah, yeah,
You're done.
yeah. He had no problem, man, picking who to go. That was a real
Yeah,
quick
yeah.
choice. He says,
That
"Hey,
was-
we're going to sink here. Ron, you're out."
That was easy. You're done. All right. Justin Sanchez, Orlando, Florida. Question number 2. Did you ever participate in or work in any boys' ranch events with or for Eddie Graham?
Yes, I certainly did. And from Tampa to the Boys Ranch in Florida, which is almost in Georgia, it's basically somewhere between when you're on Interstate 10. After you cross over 75 going west, it's probably another 30 miles. And then you turn north and go maybe another 30 miles. I wrestled in Miami and in Tallahassee, which were the longest wrestling trips you could get in Florida. And this Florida Boys Ranch event was actually the longest Florida trip I ever made while I was there in 4 years. It was 540 miles round trip from Tampa.
Hmm.
And so we get up there, and that boys' ranch is really out in the middle of nowhere, man. It's the only thing there. And what a great concept these boys' ranches are. And they started with a guy named Cal Farley back in Texas in the 1930s. And Cal Farley was a wrestler, and he built the first boys' ranch. And it became such a popular thing. He started building them in other cities. Around 1930 or 40, and I know I've told this story before, but to me it's a fascinating thing. Cal Farley was so popular that they made a stamp for him.
Wow.
He had his own stamp, the Cal Farley Boys Ranch stamp. And so Eddie, when he got to Florida and he was becoming successful, and he had been out there around Dory Jr. and Senior, he and good friends with Senior. He went to the Boys Ranch and he fell in love with the concept, and he sponsored and fostered the Boys Ranch in Florida. And he spent a lot of money with the Boys Ranch. He really was Eddie Graham was a very, very wonderful person, man. Just amazing what he did for people. And so he had this boys ranch, and so we went there. And when we got there, uh, there was nobody there were no fans. It was just the boys at the ranch. It wasn't for the community around there.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember the name of the closest little town, but they were all small towns up in that area.
Yeah.
So and I remember when we got there, sitting and looking at the crew that was going to wrestle that night.
Yeah.
I think there was two top guys on the card, like maybe a Jack Briscoe and Paul Jones or Buddy Colt, maybe somebody like that. And the rest of the card was filled with all these young, going to become stars in the future, guys that were there working at territory. Dick Slater was in that dressing room. Kevin Sullivan was in that dressing room. Mike Graham, Roy Lee Welch, my cousin, his brother, Jackie Welch, Bob Orton Jr. was in that dressing room. And, when I think back on this event, every one of those guys worked for me in Southeastern years later, years after this. This was probably 1971 when I went up there. And, it was really amazing that I ended up having all these guys that I had made these road trips with when we were younger and green and not making any money and just all so eager to become stars and working hard at it. It was a great group, and they just kept coming. All these youngsters that I had known, and I brought so many of them in because I had a friendship with them, and I knew they were great workers. I knew that they were going to have good matches, and boy, none of them ever disappointed me.
Well, so you guys would set up on the boys' ranch and do an entire show for the kids?
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So,
Yeah.
but did you have any? Were heels participating with baby faces? I mean, how did it work?
Yeah, same basic concept.
Right.
They had a little gymnasium there, and they set the ring in the gymnasium, and they had some chairs, and those that didn't have a chair had to stand up and watch. But you had Jack Briscoe against Buddy Colt. Top babyface, top heel. But the card wasn't full of that type of stuff. Eddie kind of picked and chose who he wanted to send, and he was so smart about that because I think he knew that it's going to make an impression on us going up there and seeing this operation and what he's doing up there for these kids, these young homeless kids, man, that rather than being on the street, he puts them on these ranches, and they have the horses, and it's a great life for them, man. And Eddie would go up there on a lot of occasions and wrestle with them.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah,
Just having fun. Yeah.
Oh yeah, he would go up there, and they would throw out these amateur mats, were about 2 inches thick across the gym floor.
Yeah.
And Eddie would get down in there. He'd get down and work with those boys.
That's awesome. And listen, that's the perfect distraction for kids, boys that age, that are thinking about anything, but then they get, it's a horse, and it immediately just grabs their attention. Or Dick Slater or Kevin Sullivan, somebody they've seen on TV, and Bob Orton Jr., that immediately grabs their attention. And so that's awesome, though, that you guys.
It puts them in the right direction.
Absolutely, absolutely.
All those kids basically were somewhere between the age of 13 and 20.
Wow, yeah.
And and if you turn those type of kids loose, and they've got no direction in their lives, and they have no money, and they're starving, and they're just going to get into trouble.
Yeah.
And by putting them on that ranch and giving them the opportunity to mess with horses and to send them some wrestling, and that weren't the only things that they had. They had a lot of other different type of events that they would send there. Eddie would send and pay whatever the money cost to entertain those boys.
Yeah, but a great way just to make them think about different things, and you guys giving of your time that way. That's pretty cool. All right, let's go. Number 3, Clyde asked. It doesn't say where Clyde is from, but I always think about Waylon Jennings. Clyde played electric bass. All right, so let's go with Clyde's question. Other than Charlie Carr and Paul Jones, Who were other wrestlers from Roy's era that you personally met?
Okay. Wow. Uh, Jace, I want to try to piece this together before I get started on it. Just kind of
Well, and I was going to say too, give us update us a little bit on how far back we're going.
Okay, so if you're talking Charlie Carr actually wrestled against my grandfather Roy. He was a star for my grandfather Roy in the 30s. And then he trained my dad, Lester Welch. He trained Joe McCarthy, some of the greatest of all time. The Baby Blimp. Charlie Carr was just a phenomenal shooter. And then 20 years after that, he trained me and my brother. He would and lived on our farm with us. I mean, Charlie Carr, I loved Charlie Carr, and he was one of the toughest shooters I'd ever seen. He wrestled a style different than any guy I had ever seen. Most wrestlers you were in real trouble if you got on your back or your side. And Charlie Carr liked to wrestle from his side. He would go to his side when you took him down, and then you would reach in for something, and he would wrist lock you, man. He was so good at wrist locks. He did, and he knew how to. He'd twist your arm. He knew the proper technique, and he'd have you screaming, man, instantly. And and he could get it from any direction. So Charlie Carr was an old timer from back in let's say the 40s, at least the 40s. He was probably in his heyday, maybe in the 40s. Paul Jones was the promoter in Atlanta, who was one of the original members of the NWA in 1948 with the Atlanta territory. Great guy, big old son of a gun for his age. Back in those days, guys weren't big. My grandfather was only about 5'8", when he started wrestling, 150 pounds. But Paul Jones was about 6'3" and 220. I mean, he was a hoss in his time, and he was a hook scissor man. Every guy had their own finish hole back in those days.
He was a
and they were all shooting finish holes. Paul Jones had a tremendous hook scissor, and I remember when I first started wrestling, he took me off to the side in the dressing room, and he goes, "You got those long legs." He goes, "Kind of like I do, you know." And he says, "You need to be hook scissoring guys, right?" And I was like, "Okay, well, show me, Paul," you know, and he did. And wow, I probably made a lot of guys squeal with hook scissors. That a lot of people never use that hold. You had to have real long legs.
Yeah. Okay. So the scissor part, I'm pretty sure that's your legs.
Yeah.
All right. But the hook part, what's that?
Okay. So when you scissor your legs, when you're a kid and you're wrestling somebody and you get behind them and you hook your legs around them, you keep your legs out straight and you hook them at the feet, correct?
Right.
That's called a scissor. That's a scissor. That's a hook scissor.
Gotcha.
Okay. The hook part of it is when he got behind you, he crossed his right leg in front of your stomach and hooked it behind his left knee.
Oh, okay.
And it's a whole different hold.
Wow.
You go from a little pain to, oh my God, let me go. Right?
Wow.
It's like, wow. It's a totally different deal. So the hook scissor is so much better hold than just a regular kid scissors, I call it, where kids get hook somebody and they put their legs long ways and hook their feet together and they try to squeeze them with their thighs. This hold wasn't that at all. It was a totally different animal, and it was intense. So there's another guy from in the 40s. Now, I was lucky enough to meet one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, who goes all the way back to before my granddad's day, Ed Strangler Lewis. And Ed Strangler Lewis was a big monster of a guy whose hold was a headlock. And he had the most powerful headlock ever in wrestling, no doubt about it. He can make anybody give up when he got a headlock on you. In fact, he had a contraption built that had springs, real heavy-duty springs in it, about the size of a head, and he would just put it underneath his arm like it was a person's head, and he would squeeze that thing flat.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
and you'd watch it and you'd go, geez, that don't look so bad, you know. But then, he'd say, well, put your head in here. And I was a little boy. I remember seeing him. I probably wasn't more than 10 years old.
Oh.
And he's old, real old at this point. But he says, here, give me your head, son. They're not stupid enough to put it in there. And he didn't have to crank down very far to get my attention. But Ed Strangler Lewis was a world champion. Really, really, there were the three famous wrestlers back in the old days before professional wrestling became a big sport. And Ed Strangler Lewis was kind of one of the guys responsible for wrestling becoming the sport that it became, professional wrestling becoming the sport that it became. I got one guy named Pat Malone who used to work for my grandfather. He worked in Memphis, and he was backstage. He kept people from coming up on the stage in Memphis. They had a big old auditorium there with a stage, and he was in charge of the stage, and he did a darn good job of it. He was an old-time shooter, and he used to talk to me and tell me stories about how mean my granddad was. You got the meanest granddaddy anybody ever had, kid.
All right.
And he'd tell me stories about what he saw him do. I saw him do this, and I saw him do that. There was another guy that worked for Roy at the same time. He was a former wrestler too, and his name was Danny Dusick. Now, the Dusick brothers were very, very, very popular wrestlers in the 40s and the 50s. And Danny was one of those first original Dusick brothers. And he was the same thing about Roy. He wanted to tell you Roy's stories all the time. You got to be friends with these two guys, because once they knew you were Roy's grandson, oh man, they were like mother hens.
Right.
Yeah, that nobody is going to give you any problem, man, because those boys will be right on them. Another guy I was lucky enough to meet was a tremendous promoter. And a tremendous wrestler, and a great guy, Paul Bosch in Houston, Texas. Famous, extremely famous. If you were a wrestler and you were invited by Paul Bosch to work to work Houston, you were in, man. You were going to have a great experience, because just being around him was really a good thing. Paul Bosch definitely would be in that group. And I got one more. Dave, this one is a midget. The midget that trained most of the midgets in the 40s and the 30s and the 40s and the 50s and even into the 60s was a guy they called him Lord Littlebrook.
Yeah. Okay.
And Lord Littlebrook, this son of a gun was bad. I mean, he was a shooter, and when you're around the midget, you don't consider them to be really, especially, when you get to be when I was about 6'6" and 160 pounds or so, he came to visit us, spent the night with us. And I had a king size bed, and I remember Dad put me on the couch, and he put Lord Littlebrook in my king size bed, the midget, right?
Right.
And then so I was a little bit smart aleck about it, but kind of a joking. I was ribbing him, and he knew I was ribbing him. But when he got ready to go to bed, I said, "You think you're going to have enough room in there, Littlebrook?"
Here it goes.
He would laugh about it. He thought it was funny. And so the next morning, I got up before he did. And Mom had fixed breakfast for everybody, and it was all finished. And she said, "Go in there and get Littlebrook up." And so I went in, and I kind of took my foot and pushed him a little bit, right? Like, "Hey, it's time to get up." And he was like, "Oh, yeah." He was, so he was. It was a rib, and he knew it, but he was going to rib me too. So So I turned and I waited till he got up. He got his stuff on and everything, and then I started walking down the hallway toward the kitchen in front of him. And he just walked underneath my legs, right? Put his head right up between my legs and picked me up to where my feet didn't touch the floor. He had me,
He
right?
picked you up.
Yeah, like I weighed nothing.
Right,
I mean,
right.
he was extremely strong. It was like,
Yeah.
wow, I was blown away. So, once he got my feet off the floor, well, I couldn't do anything. I mean, I'm sitting up there and I felt like I was going to topple backward or forward, you
Uh-huh.
know, and he was laughing because he knew he had me, right?
Is he probably hugging you around your knees?
Yeah,
Yeah.
he got his head. He just walked.
Yeah.
I'm walking in front of him, and he just ducked his head. He puts him right between my legs, and he hooks my thighs right over my thighs, and he stands up with me.
Wow. Okay. So
Now he's got me
Yeah.
right.
So you're off balance, obviously.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, I can't do anything. I'm at his mercy, right?
Yeah.
And he's really loving it. Then yeah, he's laughing, and he carries me all the way into the kitchen that way, and I'm saying, put me down. Put me down, because I couldn't get off. I'd had to take a bump to get down. I didn't want to take a bump, so Lord Littlebrook. That's my Littlebrook story, and I don't think I ever saw him any after that. But he really, really impressed me with the power of midgets. I mean, you don't expect them to be as strong as they are, and wow, Littlebrook was really, really strong, and he was really, really tough. He was a great shooter. I mean,
Yeah.
he had so much respect. In fact, he actually worked like an agent for all of the midgets in the wrestling business. And if you wanted midgets, you had to get in touch with Littlebrook, and he would send you the guys, but he would take a cut of their pay too.
Yeah.
So,
You don't see it then. It seemed like then there was always a midget involved, or midget matches occasionally, 2 or 3 times a year at our local venue, the Farm Center. But
right.
Nowadays, does it happen anymore? I mean, in this,
I don't think there's any of it like it. No professional or very few professional organizations. Bring midgets in.
Are we
like
too politically correct now?
I don't know.
And can you even call them midgets?
Probably got something to do with it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's there's a problem with it. You're making fun of them, which that wasn't really true.
Yeah.
Never was the case. But you used to have the same situation when you booked women wrestlers. You had to go through Moolah, the fabulous Moolah.
Uh-huh.
And she had trained all of them, and she took her little cut, and you had to deal with Moolah if you wanted women, and you had to deal with Littlebrook if you wanted midgets.
Damn it, we can't even go midget bowling anymore. Sorry. I don't know where that came from. All right, let's go to number 4. Ben Smith from Statesboro, Georgia. Given Roy's influence across the state of Tennessee, how did Buddy start his negotiations with Les Wolff to take over Memphis? Was Roy kept in the dark until the deal was finalized? Was Buddy aware of any hostility, given that he had just acquired the one town Goulis had never controlled?
I love these Memphis questions. Memphis, to me, is one of the greatest wrestling histories of all, and one of the greatest wrestling cities in the history of the world, for that matter. Not just America, but for the world. I mean, wow, what a tremendous wrestling market. So I guess to answer this, you got to back it up a little ways. Roy obviously was partners with Nick, and they had never owned Memphis. And I don't know how Roy ended up with almost every major city in the South at one time, but he didn't have Memphis, which was only about 80 miles away from where he lived. And I never, that's a question I never asked him, and I should have. I would have really liked to know the answer to that. But so Les Wolff was the promoter in Memphis, Tennessee in the 1950s. And he was a Texas guy. And I don't know if he'd ever had success there. Memphis never became a huge wrestling city until my dad went there. And we went there in 1958, late 58, 59. And So my dad found out that Les Wolff wanted to sell Memphis. And Dad had had this long run in Gulf Coast down there, Mobile over to Dothan, Panama City to Tallahassee, from Tallahassee to New Orleans, basically. And he had just set that part of the world on fire, man. Drew 40,000 people in one night in Mobile. I mean, one crowd. So he had that territory really on fire. He saved his money, and he heard that Memphis was for sale. Now, and I think the question here from Mr. Smith was Roy kept in the dark until the deal was finalized? And I'd say that's a good case. I'm pretty sure that's exactly what happened, because Roy and Nick always wanted to get their hands on Memphis, and if it became available, they would have wanted the first shot at it. But I got a feeling, because of the way that Roy did business, and he was a little heavy-handed, that he and Les Wolff probably had problems somewhere along the line. And when Les got ready to sell it, he wouldn't sell it to Roy or to Nick, because maybe he didn't like them and he knew how much they wanted it. So he was kind of getting even in a way. So but Dad now was darn sure aware that buying Memphis from Les Wolff, right there basically in close to the heart of Roy's territory, which was Nashville, Tennessee, there's going to be some hostility there. I mean, they're not going to be happy that Roy's son came in and bought Memphis when Roy couldn't buy Memphis.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was it created some problems, and but there's a whole lot of things that were going on that Roy had a real advantage over Dad. Roy had been the promoter, and he had set up the Tennessee Athletic Commission, and that commission did whatever he wanted to do. And basically, he had the ability, when he got ready to tighten the screws, to take over Memphis without even having to buy it. And so Roy and Dad had a very peculiar relationship. It was made even worse, I guess, when Dad bought Memphis, and it started to explode. I mean, it didn't just grow; it exploded, and it made all of Roy's towns look bad, because Memphis was the hoss of all of the South. They were drawing to 20,000 people, a lot of shows, and anywhere from 12 to 20,000. Wow, this huge crowds for a city the size of Memphis.
Yeah.
So
wow.
So the Dad and Les Wolff had a great relationship in a lot of ways. They both loved horses. They loved rodeos. They loved roping calves. They were big into horses, and so they had a lot in common. And Les Wolff didn't just stay there in Memphis during all of Dad's years. We were there from probably 58 to 60, and maybe even into 61. He was there the entire time. But when Dad went into Atlanta in 1965, Les Wolff moved from Texas onto our farm in Georgia, and stayed there with us for probably 3 years. So they had a tremendous relationship. Wow, it was a bad deal for Roy and Nick, because Dad had been so successful with it, and it had never done good until we got there. And I think it became a problem for Roy and Nick, and then they finally pulled the trigger on that commission deal, and they had the commissioners start telling my dad that you can't have wrestlers thrown out of the ring anymore. Crazy stuff, You can't have wrestlers do this or do that. And although it would be legal in every other city in Tennessee,
right?
He couldn't do it in Memphis, right?
Wow, yeah.
So, and they stayed on him so long that he became so disenchanted with what was happening that he basically walked away from Memphis.
Wow.
Best town in America, best city in America.
Wow.
And Roy and Nick walked in. And
wow.
That's a great question. Really, I appreciate that question, Ben. That's a really good question, and And a lot of fans probably don't know the history of Memphis, but Memphis is just a phenomenal wrestling town. There's so many stories in Memphis. One of them being Sputnik Monroe, who really was one of the first people to ever step up for the blacks and just say if they can't sit anywhere they want to in the Ellis Auditorium in their big building downtown, that I won't wrestle here anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And he was so popular that when he said that, and the city would not let him have it, they wouldn't integrate the building. Basically, he quit. He disappeared, and when he did, the town disappeared, the money disappeared, the fans disappeared.
Yeah,
and finally they had to bring him back, and they promised him, if you'll come back, Sputnik, we'll integrate the building. So one of the first cities in the South to integrate their buildings and not have blacks in a certain area of the building was Memphis, Tennessee, and it was all because of a guy named Sputnik Monroe.
Yeah, and he was not just a flamboyant, what is that streak in his hair, wrestler. When it came to civil rights, people don't realize what he did and what he did in Memphis. And he would go down to Beale Street and he would go into the black nightclubs. And everything I know about Sputnik Monroe, you told the story. So it's really amazing. And when you go back, what episode was that on this episode? Sputnik stories?
I don't know.
They're along the way. But
I haven't gone back to re-listen to number 10.
Yeah.
It must be probably something on there because he's definitely talking about this time frame here.
Yeah.
And Sputnik was a phenomenal character for wrestling, and in my opinion, definitely should be in everybody's Hall of Fame.
And I don't know if he knew what he was doing for the black community or civil rights, period, eventually. So, but anyways, and really some of the best studcasts, those are the originals. All of these are the originals, of course. So if you, as you're going back and listening, find the one that really focuses in on Sputnik Monroe, and you will be amazed at what happened in Memphis with this guy. All right, as we move forward, the fifth and final question. John Thompson, Eugene, Oregon, out there on the left coast. You have said your father had a love of horses. Did we just do that? No.
Well, I mentioned about horses.
Okay,
this
right.
Is good.
Okay.
This is kind of a follow-up.
That's what I was thinking. Wow, did I just ask this? What kind of horses was he most interested in and why?
Dad was a quarter horse man. And for those that don't know why they're called quarter horses, it's because they're the fastest horses on earth for a quarter of a mile.
Wow. Okay.
And that's because they're built bigger. They're much more muscular than a thoroughbred, which means they're faster in a short distance. But the longer they go, the more tired they get because they're carrying a lot more weight and a lot more muscle. So, why they were so good in the quarter of a mile is they would burst out of the gate quickly, man, and they run like furiously for a quarter of a mile. I mean, I've ridden them, and you have tears come into your eyes and blow out. You can feel the tears flying into your ears. They run so fast within a quarter of a mile. I mean, it's just like riding a rocket.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so Dad was really into his quarter horses, and they obviously they're more than just more muscular. They were bred obviously to rope calves for calf roping, and they were used in rodeo events. They were used for steer dogging, and head and heel roping. One guy ropes the head and the other guy ropes the heels. A little teamwork deal, and they also made great cutting horses. And they were bred for that, man. They could walk into a herd, and you could pick a cow or a calf in amongst 40 cows, and say, "Get that calf out of there," and that horse would be able to walk into that herd and maneuver his way around. Mm-hmm. And then once he separated that calf from the herd, then he would really start to do his thing. If you've ever seen a cutting horse work,
Yeah.
it's one of the most beautiful things there is.
Yeah.
And they are so fast, and they get that head down on the ground, and they're head to head with that calf, and that calf cannot get past them to get back in that group of steers or calves or whatever's back there. Beautiful animals, beautiful animals.
Well, there you go. That's another Southeastern Rewinds Tell Me More, where the Tennessee stud Ron Fuller answered 5 questions about Studcast number 10. Again, this one was called Tony's Call. And again, that was a reference to the original Studcast co-host, Knoxville's Tony Basilio. And this one is now on Ron's new home on YouTube on Southeastern Rewind. Remember to find Southeastern Rewind on YouTube, subscribe, ring the bell to get reminders on when the greatest stories in wrestling will be dropped on YouTube. And be sure to tell your friends about Southeastern Rewind. For Ron Fuller, I'm David Sommers. We'll be back soon with another Tell Me More.